Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm Dominik Klinkenberg. I'm also working at DLR, but today I'm here as the project manager of Net for Society, so the thematic NCP network for Societal Challenge 6. So as a first quick recap, because it's often unclear for actors from other challenges what the Societal Challenge 6 is about, so it also has this catchy title, Europe in a Changing World, Inclusive, Innovative and Reflective Societies. So it's the main entry point for the social sciences and humanities, or one of the main entry points. Of course, we are all aware of this SSH integration approach, but this is the main origin of the social sciences and humanities. So all the different aspects which might be included, so politics, economics, anthropology, history, everything is this very heterogeneous group is concluded within the scope of social sciences and humanities. And these actors, together with a strong input of ICT colleagues, so information and communication technologies, are working on this topic of Europe in a changing world. So you see here on the slide a very broad overview of the topics this challenge is facing. So reducing inequality, social inclusion, discrimination in Europe, which obviously leads to the social sciences and the humanities obviously as well, but to the society as a whole. In the second point, you can also already see the inclusion of the ICT, so new forms of innovation and engagement of citizens. So we have the citizens on the one hand side and the innovation often in the form of ICT on the other side, and they should match within this challenge to gain new innovations, social innovations. And also we see at this third point, foster an innovative public sector. So a big group of actors in this challenge is the public sector. So with new forms of delivering public goods and services. And then the second last point, issues of memories, identities, tolerance and cultural heritage. This really refers to the cultural heritage, which was a very big topic, as you will probably remember last year when we celebrated the European Year of Cultural Heritage in Europe. So there were many topics on this issue of cultural heritage. And then the last point, I put it in bold letters, promote coherent and effective cooperation with third countries. So it's already in the description of this challenge. So when we look at international cooperation, as we will all know, in FP7 we had this INCO and then we turned at the beginning of Horizon 2020 for Societal Challenge 6 into INT. So no specific INCO program in Horizon 2020, but the international cooperation is mainstreamed, as we all know. But in Societal Challenge 6, we had additionally some dedicated INT action within Societal Challenge 6. So we had in the work programs 2014-15 and 16-17 one, or let's say two specific calls focusing only on international cooperation. So it's not only that partners from international or from third countries should be included, but the topics itself was also on international cooperation. So this is also reflected in the share of flag topics. So in work program 2014-15, we had 44 topics overall. 15 were flagged as international cooperation, which means more than a third of the topics. In 16-17, even more than the half of them were flagged for international cooperation. And now in 18-19, it got much less to only 18% more or less. And the assumption, or what we can see now from the work program 2020 draft we have, that it might decrease even further. But of course, always this flagging is not originally this this indicator for the possibility to take part in this challenge, because we know that, for example, if we go back to this SSH flagging we have also, only because it's flagged, it doesn't mean that there will be an SSH actor involved after all. So also we don't know if this is INCO flag that there will be an INCO partner after all, and vice versa. So if we just visualized it on the next slide. So we had this large increase in 1617 with a lot of flag topics, and the assumption, this is only in yellow because it's only an assumption, that there will be much less in 2020. Just a second. So if you look at the thematic areas, we were focusing already in 2014-15. This is the INT call I mentioned earlier, Europe as a global actor. So it's already mentioned in the name that this is about Europe in the terms of a global view. And it's about Europe's contribution to a value-based global order and its contestants. And European Union's contribution to global development. So it was really about the global approach, and a lot of cultural and science diplomacy that was taking place, and also the EU-LAC relations. And down here in the boxes you can see this is also, these are all quotes from the different topics and calls that were mentioned. So we were working together with the Balkans, the two shores of the Mediterranean, Turkey and its wider neighborhood. So basically the MENA region, the South and East Mediterranean region, and the Eastern partnerships. So they were all mentioned in the different topics and calls, or in this call in 2014-15. And 2016-17, we had this call named Engaging Together Globally, so also the global in the name. And there it was also about strengthening the role of Europe as a global actor. So there was the aim of an improved coordination of member states' foreign policies and the creation of synergies to really work together, and not just Europe and the rest of the world, but really try to improve the coordination and to build syntheses of these foreign policies. And we see a lot of foreign policies all over this, there it is. And so it's, of course, as I said earlier, a lot of politics, a lot about political sciences, social sciences. So yeah, as you can say, policy on a global level. And here you also have again, that was the wrong one. The EU neighboring countries were one target group. Here, in addition, the Asia-Pacific, Central Asia and China, Brazil, China and the USA. And it's one specific group was its former colonies and other countries and regions. This really refers to something on the scheme of cultural heritage again, so the role of historical and cultural remains and interrelations, e.g. through colonialization. So this is again referring to the cultural heritage aspect, that that Europe had these former colonies, and how are these colonies acting today, or how is the cultural heritage within these colonies reflecting lives in these societies or in European societies. And finally, the focus of this, or these 3 years program, we see here a lot stronger orientation also on ICT again. So we have this this digital society, very broad, and the future of labor and the future labor market. This refers to the fourth industrial revolution, and what does this mean for society, for the employees, not so much on the technical side, but really the interrelation between technical and human, which is also shown in the new types of economy, intelligent specialization, disruptive innovation. So what does innovation mean for society? What does it mean for people and their behavior? And what does it mean for employees? So if a job gets lost because of innovation, what does this mean for society, and what does this mean for this specific person? Another important aspect, again, on the role also on global level, is the radical ideologies. We will see afterwards a few specific topics, especially on migration. We also already heard this morning where radical ideologies is a big part. Social divide on a societal level again. And then this nice phrase, new international geopolitical realities. This, of course, refers to a global level, as it says, and it refers to different new developments like we had in the US with a new president, or formerly new president, with China, with different countries all over the globe. And these focuses are now translated into 3 calls we are actually facing in work program 1819. So as I mentioned earlier, the migration calls. Here it is obviously about refugees, about the integration of refugees, and the reform and synchronicity also of asylum systems, as we all know from the news and everything. This is still a challenge and still an issue that needs to be solved, how to cope with the so-called migration crisis or refugee crisis, which should maybe more called migration challenge instead of crisis, because we had migration since ever. And this is also something that that is addressed in this challenge, that migration is no new phenomena, but something that we had since decades or since thousands of years, and societies always had to cope with it. And what we can learn from the past for our current challenges. So the next call is then the socio-economic and cultural transformations in the context of the 4th industrial revolutions. Also what I mentioned earlier, so here's the impact of ICT on the working environment, a big aspect. And as I said, not so much the innovation and technology itself, but what does this mean for the life of people, for the working environment? So it's basically the socio-economic factors, and not just only economic, but also, and then there's also the cultural heritage involved. It doesn't really fit into this description of the call, but it is in there. But there's also a big part of ICT in collaboration with cultural heritage. So when it comes to digitization of cultural goods, of artifacts and everything. And then a big part also relevant for the global perspective or the inclusion of third countries is governance for the future, because here it's not only on national and European level, but also on global government level. And this, of course, needs the inclusion of third countries, of international partners. And it's a lot about democracy, populism, and EU foreign policy, which obviously does not only focus on Europe, but beyond. And to give you a better overview about how the third countries or the third countries should be included, or I put here some examples from the different topics. So we have this migration 1, for example. Here it is about migration mobility patterns. So how are people actually moving? And so or the European Commission said we need a global perspective on the patterns, motivations, and modalities of international migration flows. So it doesn't help if we only look at Europe and how it's going to be, or how it's working in Europe or not working in Europe, but on a global level. And the next one, we see that the inclusion of EU member states and associated countries is foreseen. So also on the migration integration through ICT-enabled solutions. So this is something that in other countries or other continents, these ICT-enabled solutions might already exist, and Europe can learn from this. The next topic, international protection of refugees in a comparative perspective. We see the frame international already included in the topic title. So here it's essential to have international cooperation, while in the ones before it would be good to have international cooperation in there, but here it's definitely named. It is encouraged, but still, if already countries like Canada, Brazil, South Africa, and Jordan are mentioned, then you should include them to write a competitive proposal in the end. And yeah, so the next call, governance for the future. We have here the trust in governance, because this is really an issue, as we all know in Europe, that the trust in governance got lost over the last years a bit in some countries in Europe. So here also the experience from outside Europe is important to have, or could be relevant. And here we have another one, new forms of delivering public goods and inclusive public services. As I mentioned before, this is a very important part in this societal challenge, or in this call. And here it says that proposals shall include a minimum of 6 relevant national administration in at least 6 different EU member states or associated countries. So also here the concentration on associated countries, but also on international actors. We have some other examples here. I put this in because there's the MENA region, very prominent, named, and the Balkans in the topic description, which is a very important region for this societal challenge. We will see this after all in the at the end, also in the statistics, that countries from the MENA regions are more or less, besides the typical ones, China and USA, are one of the big players in this challenge. Yeah, and the next topic is also relevant for international cooperation. And finally, in the transformations call, there's not so much on international level, but it's just mentioned that they should develop and apply collaborative tools in Europe and beyond. And now, as you all know, we don't have a work package 2020, a work program 2020 yet, but at least we can take a look in what we are having now in the draft. And there's also something or some indications that there will be international cooperation needed. But as I said, these are really the 3 only right now known topics where international cooperation is mentioned, at least by name. So we have this transformation skills and globalization. So the globalization is already in the call text, so probably it will be important to include especially developed, emerging and developing countries. Then the foreign and security policy, it's named cooperation with partners from third countries and is encouraged in order to have comparative perspectives. So this is also a very important part, this comparative perspective in our challenge, because we are talking about policies, about societies, and it's always easier to compare societies and policies instead of just working on one handle. And then at the end, there is this inclusive and innovative practices for the integration of post-2015 migrants in local communities. So here it's also mentioned that it should be cooperated with scholars from Africa and the Middle East again, as well as with Canada. So this is also one of the topics that we heard earlier today, this agreement on migration topics with Canada, where Canada is involved. Unfortunately, we don't have a Canadian SC6 NCP yet, I guess, or at least referring to the participant portal. So maybe there will be one. Okay. So then for the end, a few numbers. So you see here the applicant numbers in Societal Challenge 6. So for all topics, we have this 12,000 different applicant organizations, of which are 954 third countries. So it's only 7.89%, which is not very much. But if you look at the flag topics, you see that there are 37% of the applicant organizations are indeed third countries. So we can say that the flagging does really work for this challenge. Whereas, as I said earlier, for example, the SSH integration flagging is not working that properly always, but here, apparently, the flag topics for international cooperation really addresses third countries or international partners. And if we look at this picture, we see here the third countries it's a very, very big part of the applicant organizations. And then at the end, when we look at the applicant organization countries, we see here the all-stars China and United States at the beginning. Then there's Brazil of the third place. And And then we have, as I mentioned earlier, Morocco, Egypt, and Lebanon, very, very strong because of these migration topics we have on the MENA region we are facing. So this is very interesting and a bit different from other challenges. And if you look at the funding, I don't have a slide for this yet, but I looked it up. So China is on top, or let's say on funded projects, not budget-wise, but on the funded projects. China, Brazil is in second, the US, South Africa, and then there's a group also again on Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Jordan. So also the MENA region. And now I'm coming to an end, and with Brazil here marked, I'm happy to hand over to Gorec, our Brazilian NCP, to give an overview on Brazilian participation in Societal Challenge 6 or in Horizon 2020 overall. Thank you.